So the third part of the session is focused on the multi-stakeholder model, whether it's a myth or a reality, as we discussed in the corridors. And essentially the idea is just to share experiences of maybe some best practices or successful models of multi-stakeholder, and just try to see what we mean by multi-stakeholder in practice. And in that sense, I thought of hearing from a couple of that we know that might want to share something as well, but then from all of you, if you want to reflect in the second part. I would start with Andrea Beccalli from ICANN, and I'll probably pass you this microphone. I don't know if there is one over there. Maybe briefly, again to reiterate the organization or the structure of the approach of ICANN itself on a global level when it comes to multi-stakeholder model and bodies and involvement of stakeholders and mechanisms and so on and so forth. So Andrea, the floor is yours.
Does it work? Yes. Thank you, Vlada. So I'm passing around some leaflets that actually explains a little bit the multi-stakeholder model within ICANN. And so I don't have to go too much into details. It's only in English, but I guess you will understand that one. And on one side, actually, of the leaflet, it is this very catchy question on who runs the internet, with a big question mark. And then, unfortunately, the answer is like no one runs really the internet, or at least a lot of organizations collaborate together to make these things happen. On the multi-stakeholder model and ICANN, I mean, let me just also share a personal experience when I first started getting interested into these issues. The way the internet developed carries a lot of cultural heritage and influences. So this model of collaborative work, which enabled the first research centers to develop ARPANET, and influenced also the way it turned out to be the management of the organization, in this case ICANN. So principles like bottom-up processes, or they really come from the so-called RFC, which is called, it's an acronym for Request for Comments. And if I'm not wrong, the first RFC was by John Postello, Steve Kroger, one of the two. And the idea was just, okay, I have some proposal out, let me hear from the rest of the community what they think about, and when we reach some form of consensus, the RFC, it actually becomes in itself something more than a simple proposal. It becomes kind of a shared common rule and principle. So these things were developed into the technical community among engineers, and at one point in time there was a transition from the engineer community to a larger community. And in this transition is where a lot of the cultural heritage comes to play. So for instance, in the ICANN jargon, you divide stakeholders between the private sector, the governments, the technical community, and the civil society. When I first looked at those things, I was back at school. I was a young student at the university in Rome, and the word civil society in Italy has an important meaning, because it actually comes from an Italian author, which defined the word società civile, Gramsci. So it's like one of the leading philosophers of the leftist movement in Italy. And the definition of civil society in this case had no match with what civil society was meant to in the ICANN model. So I had the first struggle there. So to answer to your question, I think there is not a single defined multi-stakeholder model. There are some principles that you can identify in that, which is the bottom-up process, the consensus process, and equal footing, that everybody is there with the same right. But then on all that, you need to go with some nuances and some further developments. You can take it as it comes out from the box. So ICANN itself is still, in a way, developing and sometimes struggling, sometimes more successfully implementing a multi-stakeholder model that is still very bounded to how engineers first got in together to develop the first ARPANET. And then at one point you have to put governments in the table. And governments comes with a completely different idea of what's their role when they enter into a room. They get officially elected, they represent, without entering into details how each election is legitimate or representative. But they have a different value for the legitimacy and representativity into the room. So precisely for this reason, it's kind of an open race of what's the most effective multi-stakeholder model. So the one in ICANN proved to be quite successful in managing the DNS and managing the expansion of the DNS. And so in 15 years we passed from an internet at 150 million to 3 billion of people. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can take this model and apply it to any other environment and it will work. I think this very simple realization within ICANN, it just happened in the last probably couple of years, maybe 3 years. Before there was kind of almost religious take and faith into the multi-stakeholder model. And as often happens with religions, you don't really realize the nuances and you just take, because you cannot challenge faith. And so a lot of the things that to an external viewer were kind of absurd. So the imbalances between the different stakeholders, the prerogatives on some stakeholders on there just because they were there since the beginning and they knew much more about the systems, they weren't really clear. And ICANN is now realizing that and trying to address those issues. So before, when I spoke about the ICANN accountability track, it's actually a whole process of redefining what is the multi-stakeholder model. Once you move from agreeing among a bunch of engineers on an RFC or a definition of a protocol into other issues which have larger implications on different aspects of our lives and of our interests. When we look at what we are trying to govern here and the model that we use, we then open up a different space which is extremely interesting. We are actually looking how to govern, even the word govern, I don't know how proper is that, a network of networks, and which was designed to be open, which was designed to be not centralized, and we had to, in a way, innovate also the way we think we should govern that. That's where we look at the multi-stakeholder model into that. So, in a way, a new technology that comes in has far-reach effects and implications, and you need to find a way that is not the all-time way to do business to govern that. And that's a kind of never-ending race, because the internet is developing at such pace and at such complexity that you cannot just stick to the one that you think identified the multi-stakeholder model and say, okay, that's it, that's how we work. All the different nuances between governance of the internet and governance on the internet, for instance, they imply different levels of how you understand the multi-stakeholder model. So if we stick into the ICANN, because that's where you asked me for, then we look into the governance of the internet, into the network, and maybe yes, we can still look at these kind of self-regulated, bottom-up, equal footing, consensus principles, and that they still work. But when you move on the governance of the internet, so all the rest that happens on top of that, then I'm not sure you can take this model and just apply it and export it as it is. So the challenge here is that when you look at national or regional examples, you actually are looking at both areas, the governance of the internet and on the internet. And you are aware that you have a model that works on the internet, although with its own limitation, but off the internet or where everything goes on top, still is a new field to venture. And it's kind of an open race. I was mentioning before that the Brazilian came out with a really successful model that helped them in boost up their stance, their global stance, because they were able to develop a model that no one had before. So I would be really interested to hear from your experiences also, because those are countries that started venturing in model of governance only 20 plus years ago, you know, and innovating and catching up very fast. So I wouldn't be surprised if an effective, innovative model of governance, which is multi-stakeholder, but with taking in consideration all these different nuances, comes from this part of the of Europe, of this region. I don't have much faith when I go and speak about this model in France or in Italy or in Spain or in Germany. And I always get this look from top to down and say, okay, who are you? You elected you. It reminds me, I don't know if it's true, but once Stalin was proposed to meet the Pope, and he asked how many troops he has, you know, so shall I meet this guy or not? So basically, sometimes I get the same feedback, and but they are losing grounds, and they are not really taking the advantages of the internet, because the model which they try to govern or seize the opportunities is the wrong one. They realize too much on the top-down, all-time telco influence. You regulate and then you innovate. You know, it's never the other way around. So I'm closing here. I'm happy to go more into these details, but I'm really looking forward to hear from your experiences and how you distinguish and how do you see these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and especially thanks for underlying that we should be talking about principles, and then implementation is something that varies from place to place. We have a specific, or we used to have a specific culture of, so to speak, multi-stakeholderism in this region called self-governance, or even socialist self-governance at some points. So there might be some new ideas coming from that history. But when we're talking about multi-stakeholder approach, usually the debates boil down to discussions on roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. So we have who are the stakeholders, and then what are their roles and responsibilities. And the governance in the internet way includes both discussion and cooperation, where the roles and responsibility, or you can have actually equal footing, and decision making. Now, decision making, one option is the RFC, which is kind of a rough consensus. The governments, as you said, have quite a different approach to decision making and the roles and responsibilities in that. And there are two important aspects that you also touched upon, I think we mentioned yesterday, when it comes to also roles and responsibilities in the governance and decision making. One is representativeness, and I think we discussed also with regards to the local IGFs, you know who is representing the government. You actually might even know who is representing the corporate sector, but you usually don't know who is representing the civil society, because it's too vague. So representativeness is also one issue to think about. And the second one is accountability. Now, who is held accountable for any decisions or consequences in a multi-stakeholder environment? We have a couple of, I think, good regional practices. So I pass the floor to Dushan to share a little bit of experiences on, well, maybe even the practical responses to these dilemmas when it comes to Serbian CCTLD.
Thanks, Vlada. First of all, we are not, I think, and I hope we are not the only multi-stakeholder model in the region, but I hope that in the region it will be more of those kind of organization. First problem for us is the term of multi-stakeholder model. The term is, we cannot translate it to our language. I think that in our languages, I should say, because I heard just an hour ago from Gorazd one term that fits this translation, više partnerski. This is something that we can use, I don't know, for Bulgaria or 6 words for Russia. Okay, so first of all, we have a term problem. Second of all, when I was in Sofia with Wolf, we were talking about Serbian model and Serbian National Registry and multi-stakeholder model, and I told him how this model survive in Serbia and how this model is born in Serbia. Those gray-haired people in the room may know about Tito, about this communist regime of former Yugoslavia, and he had an idea developing self-managed system in the firms and corporations. So basically, the basic idea was that worker is the owner of the corporation or the firm. I heard from Vlada when first materials with the term multi-stakeholder model came into Serbia, they try to translate like this self-managed system, samoupravljanje, if you know this term. So this is how we develop our national registry and our model. Back in those days when we were building this organization, government and other stakeholders didn't care about internet at all, because political situation, economical situation, and everything else was bigger issues than internet. Even government didn't care about internet at all, I should say. I could put this word. When you have a problem, when you have one person here, Mirjana Tasić, who was for 15 years all by herself CCTLD with some students for .u, in former Yugoslavia. After that, we decide to solve this problem, to build organization, and government didn't help us at all. So we built it in our way. Our way was IT organization, who are definitely stakeholders in internet industry, gather together and form the organization. After that, we try to find what is the best law model, or model in the law that we could put this multi-stakeholder model to fit in. So only foundation was the model that we could fit in with multi-stakeholder model, as we know from ICANN and from what you heard from Andrea and Vlada. So second problem in Serbia was a law. Our law doesn't know anything about multi-stakeholderism. So this is the second problem that we try, and we will try to solve in Serbia in our way. So basically, our model is bottom-up model, and we have a policies with, you can read all the policies on our site, and we try to be as transparent as we can. So, for example, for .srb, you can find every document, every policy on the site. Even our financial budget or something like that you can find on our site. So I will put the light on this topic, transparent. To be transparent is the crucial role in multi-stakeholderism, so everybody can approach on information about what you are doing, how you are doing, how you will decide on something, and every other question that any person could have. So basically this is it from Serbian registry.
Thanks, Dushan. Yeah, sure.
So it's not just the financials, the regulations, public tenders. Minutes from every Board of Governors meeting, which are held every 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, are on the website. From the beginning, we are now the session 208. That was the last one. So for each one, if you have interest and if you have time, you can see exactly what were the topics of each and votes on each and every item on Board of Governors session.
So that means we should add the word transparency to the list of principles. And I always remember the saying, too much transparency and you are naked. But I guess in this case, it's quite good to be as transparent as possible to all the stakeholders. Leonid, the Russian case, I suppose.
Thank you. Well, I would say that our experience was pretty much the same, except for it was back in 1993 that the Russian government explicitly put it in the law on communications or telecommunications, if you will, that the matter of names and addressing, let's put it in such a way, I mean, I'm just sort of trying to simplify it, shall not fall within the purview of the Russian government, and following the best current practices should be mandated to a non-governmental organization. So from the very onset, it was clear that the Russian government was not keen on grasping control over they had no idea of. What they had no idea of. That said, I must say that yes, we're multi-stakeholder, although again, and this is a very interesting twist, because it's not only the rights and responsibilities of every stakeholder, but even the composition, the blend of stakeholders, which matters in this case. Because I was just wondering, for example, for quite a while in Russia, there were no researchers who would ever explore, let's say, internet, the internet itself, and all the issues related to the internet. So does it qualify for multi-stakeholderism if we didn't have any academics? And that gets us back to that question of what multi-stakeholderism is. I'm sorry to travel that far from Russia's affairs, but I think it's important to revisit, because we should bear in mind that what was concocted by a group of distinguished practitioners, academics, and you know, I don't know, some diplomats even, if you will, you know, by the year 2005 was the working definition, which was meant to exist for a while until the community would find out, the global community, I would say, would come up with a more specified, more precise definition of how the internet should be governed. And then, of course, I would agree that there was that point, and right now there is a lot of fuss around it. All those stakeholders on equal footing in their respective roles. And then the question is, what is that respective role? Where the mandate, for example, of the government starts and where it ends. With that very quick comment, because we can elaborate on this for hours, I'm sure of that. It seems to me there was one small bit missing in that definition. And that was because at that time, nobody would envision the rise of yet another group of stakeholders. I'm sorry, another stakeholder. And that stakeholder came up now, I mean, that group came up now much more consolidated than any other stakeholders, much more influential, much more committed to their own ultimate objectives. And I would label it the internet bureaucracy. It's a tiny bit of our community, but it's very influential. I'm a part of this right now. I'm a part of this internet bureaucracy, of that nomenclatura. So I know what I'm talking about. And it's not only about ICANN. The same would go for IGF, because we have that secretariat, and we have a bunch of people around IGF who would, well, I wouldn't say milk, but who would benefit from the process itself, because they could contribute with meaningful papers, which would, of course, boost their credentials as experts and so forth. So that group knows where to seek benefits. That group would definitely pursue their goals, which may not necessarily be compatible with our, I mean, now I'm speaking as a member of the community, a broader community, with our goals. Take, for example, Net Mundiyal, which is usually cited as a shining example of multi-stakeholderism. But this is a very interesting twist. Who were, just think of this, who were the ultimate beneficiaries of that event? So Andrea named just one, Brazil, who came in full glory as an organizer of an event of an incredible scope and effect. But at the same time, let us not forget that Brazil, it's not like, it's just in the name of the country. Let's name those beneficiaries. And first and foremost would come President Dilma Rousseff, who signed a very nice law. Full credit should go to those people who drafted that law, the first ever, I mean, unbelievable law. But she signed that as a part of her presidential campaign. And basically the whole event was integrated into her presidential campaign. And who knows, perhaps because of that event, she made it for presidency. I mean, second beneficiary was, of course, and you may agree or disagree, was, of course, ICANN and its president. Indeed, it was an unbelievable effort to push, I mean, that was that push, fascinating push to create that event. And for the first time, I mean, in my memory, representatives of different governments rushed to Brazil, I don't know how many thousands of kilometers, on the invitation on both President Dilma Rousseff and ICANN and some other organizations. Let's put it in such a way. So that internet bureaucracy showed that they do have some strings to pull. I'm okay with the time? Okay, so thank you. So that boosted, let's say, that internet bureaucracy credentials as well. And look what's happened then. When the divide was still there with Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, you name them, were vocally against the decisions which were taken at that Net Mundiyal. There was yet another push, and that was not a bottom-up approach. That was top-down to create that global internet council. And guess what? And I mean, you remember that 3 seats were given to the organizers of the Net Mundiyal. And that was Brazil, ICANN, and all of a sudden, the World Economic Forum in Davos. So they were given 3 seats, like pretty much like the Security Council in UN. And 17 others would go to those who would apply for those seats. And strangely enough, nobody applied. I mean, literally nobody applied. More than this, ISOC, which is the internet community, again, a part of that internet bureaucracy, and Internet Architecture Board were quite outspoken when they just said that they would never join that initiative. So what I mean is that there was a big push at the end of the day. There were no meaningful results, but some bitterness about how this multi-stakeholder process is driven so far, which compromised the mere idea of multi-stakeholderism and participants in that process. So now we should rethink how we should restructure this multi-stakeholder model, because again, my point is that it's not only the matter of accountability or transparency, but it's that maximum account of each stakeholder role, and with a clear understanding that, well, what we are trying to attain is unattainable. We try to build in wording or in whatever pictures an ideal pattern of governing the internet, which cannot be possible at all. I mean, you cannot produce that ultimate decision which will fit all, right? So it's the process which has no visible outcome at the end. You cannot say that by year 2020 we will come up with that definite or definitive solution. So this is a mathematical task, but again, just a little bit back or aside, bureaucrats, which, Andrea, in this part of the world, internet bureaucracy, bureaucrat, it bears very, very negative connotation. If you call a person, you're a bureaucrat, in Serbia or in Russia, it means that, well, you're of a low opinion. Well, if you say to someone in the West, like, you're a bureaucrat, and he would say, yes, definitely, because I serve my country and my people, and that would bear no negative connotation. So bureaucrats will benefit all way down the road, I mean, because they are needed when the process is rolling up. You don't need a bureaucrat when the process is over. Well, you may need some to oversee that all the bits of this scheme are there. But bureaucracy is gaining importance as much as we try to progress or advance towards some sound multi-stakeholder model. So that's inevitable evil which is with us. And it's not the case for ICANN only, by the way. Let me cite just a very quick, a small, short quotation, and you would try to guess who said, I mean, which paper said this and about whom. I just got rid of some words. Though legally incorporated as a non-profit organization in a certain country, that organization has no master. Those who might hold it to account, such as national or regional organizations, depend on it. High barriers to entry make it unlikely that a rival would emerge, so that organization has a natural monopoly over the respective area. An entity like this should be regulated, but that organization answers to no government. So which paper said it and about whom? Any guesses? Well, just try, I mean, spell it out. All right, so this is the most liberal paper. That's The Economist, and you'll be surprised, that's about FIFA. See? So, I mean, whatever associations you have are different. I mean, that's subconsciously or consciously you think that something is wrong and something should be improved about that. And yet another example, and we talked about that at length with Dushan, there is yet another organization which is incorporated in a certain country, and that organization, unlike ICANN, is responsible for a very, very important part of the global development. And that organization is absolutely obscure. I mean, it has never gone public. Yet, if someone misbehaves like Russia, for example, there is a threat. We will switch you off. And then the Russia would come begging, no, please don't do this. So what kind of organization I'm talking about? Yeah, that's SWIFT. That's SWIFT. Incorporated, by the way, in Belgium. And we've never heard of that organization. So my point is that, I don't know exactly how SWIFT was incorporated, but my point is that whenever whenever an organization sticks to its mission, it will be successful regardless of anything, because instead of going and preaching for something and putting, although Andrea already said that it is no longer the case for ICANN, putting itself as a shining example of excellence, the organization should prove every day with very hard work and with, I would say, full commitment and dedication that it's there to serve the public interest. Because you would agree that SWIFT does it so, with trillions of dollars processed every day and no claims whatsoever, and thousands of members, because nearly every bank is just a member of the SWIFT. Thank you.
Okay, I took a couple of notes. One was a question, and I think it's also legitimate, whether the multi-stakeholder model needs to be a bottom-up, or it can also be a top-down, but still be a multi-stakeholder. I'm just placing it in front of you. And we might have some cases where we might have had a top-down coming from a ministry or whatever, but still ending up as a multi-stakeholder inclusive process. The second question is, who are the stakeholders, and should we really try to involve everyone? And then following up on that, can we make them happy, all of them? Or at least equally unhappy, as diplomats would say. That's also an open question. Then there was a caveat on a misuse, which is quite realistic when we were seeing it within the internet governance, debates on a possible misuse of a multi-stakeholder model by internet bureaucracy, as you put it, or whether it's a part of the problem or solution, or anyone who can maybe dominate the process. So there is a caveat to make a process which cannot be dominated by certain parties or misused. And then the last was kind of a note that this is still the work in progress. The whole multi-stakeholder model is the process that we are building. I don't know, Dushan, you wanted to add something, or should we pass on?
Just one real-life remarks. Serbia is entering European Union, and the European Union push this model as a role model. Not openly, but they want to see multi-stakeholder model organizations in our countries. So this is the real life.
Thanks. So we don't have much time. The idea was basically just to touch or scratch the surface of this debate. But I think we should take some minutes to open up the floor for any comments or other maybe examples from your countries of multi-stakeholder system or challenges you're facing that we should be aware about. So any comments around the table? Yes, Wolf, I'll pass you this one.
Well, thanks, Vlada. I must admit, after almost 10 years since I'm involved in this kind of internet governance discourses, it was a World Summit on the Information Society, Visis 1, 2003, when this term really popped up out of the discourse. Because at the very beginning, it was a UN conference and diplomats were hanging around discussing about the future of the internet. And most of those diplomats, to my memory, had no real clue about the internet. So they came with the usual regulatory approach. They knew from the telecom regulation, from the public broadcast regulation, and they still had these old patterns in their mind. And it was more or less business and civil society together pushing these guys that we got a bit more influence on the declaration of principles, on the drafting of the declaration of principles, and afterwards as a plan of action. So it was an excellent exercise at the time. Then after Tunis Visis 2, when the Internet Governance Forum, the IGF, was created, it was exactly based on this model. And it's a great concept, it's a good model, but more and more I have serious doubts about it. Because one of these doubts, it can be easily captured, it can be easily abused. You cannot enforce it, you cannot force anybody to participate. So if there is no interest, if there is no demand, you can hang around with the usual suspects. And this is my third example. Many cases of multi-stakeholderism I know from ICANN, from IGF, even Eurodic. Let's be honest. Most of the time you always meet the same usual suspects. So it's a small elite, it's a small group of people who are familiar with terms, with terminology, language, which are familiar with procedures and rules. They like it because it gives them a sort of power or a sort of exceptionality, but it's not broad-based at all. So you have the governmental folks who do this as part of their functions, of their official functions. You have the business people who have their rather particular interests, money-wise, in it. And in many, many cases, you have self-declared civil society folks with questionable legitimacy. Academia people are much better in this respect because they always can claim, well, we do this for a higher purpose. What is research and science? And the technical folks also have a rather good, I stop it here. It's a good model. I do not even could imagine a better one for the internet context. For many traditional fields, yes, but not for the internet. I could not imagine a better one. But let's be careful and let's have closer looks on it. Let's be critical about the way it works. Thanks.
Thanks, Wolf. This was very clear as probably also the final message. I mean, multi-stakeholder system is like maybe 10, not even 15 years old. So at least in the internet context, so it really is a work in progress, and we should be cautious on that. That's true. Any final thoughts around the table? Anyone else wants to jump in with a comment? Andrea? Yeah, sure.
Just as a reaction from Leonid and what Wolf said. I mean, I think I made it. I tried to make it clear also when I made this first introduction that ICANN itself is struggling with this model. ICANN it sees every day that the model has its big loopholes, and sometimes are so big that they can just swallow the old organizations. So one of the issues that is coming up in this accountability track is to work for so-called stress tests. So how to make sure that this model is bulletproof once you don't have anymore the big US governments with these big large shoulders on the back, which in a way it already undermines the multi-stakeholder model because you always need to have someone big and old school and traditional to be on the back, you know. And so when they started doing this exercise and observing that of the stress test, they started with a couple. Now I think they are down to 30 different stress tests. And a lot of them, it's actually ways to address those issues that that Wolf pointed out. It can be easily captured. You cannot force anyone to participate, and the fact it's transparent doesn't mean it's accountable by default. But I mean, it took, I don't know, 3 centuries for democracy to develop, and I don't know how many I don't know how many revolutions, but it will take some time. So I really invite you just to, if you find it interesting, to join this debate, and the ICANN accountability track really looks into these issues. And on the other point on Net Mundiyal, I mean, no doubt that ICANN played at the worst stage in this event, and also pushing in front its own interest, because at one point it was a matter of survival, because if you're not going to organize something like Net Mundiyal, you know that there is on the other side the ITU with the process for the plenipotentiary, and nowadays this track is still there. So if you want to know some background information on that, I mean, the whole Net Mundiyal really came out as a very extremely smart and sharp move that the CEO of ICANN had when he heard Dilma Rousseff speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York, and few weeks before she figured out that her mobile phone was hacked by NSA, and the mobile phones and all the communication of top management of Petrobras was hacked. She was very upset, and she wasn't the only one upset. I mean, we should all be upset. I mean, but she made this very clear, and she went there. And in the same trip, she was supposed to meet Obama, and she refused. She said, "I'm not going to see you." And that's, in diplomatic terms, is still something quite strong. And by coincidence, ICANN CEO was in Montevideo, not far from Brasilia. And he heard, as everyone else, what she was saying there, and she was saying, we need to solve these issues, and the way we solve these issues is that we're going to have a treaty. And as you may know or not, when you have a treaty, means that in one room, only governments with their flags, they come there, and they decide. Then what is decided, you take it, whether you like it or not. Okay. And if we go down to some common shared ideas, probably we all can share the fact that we cannot go on a treaty to govern the internet in a multilateral way. So ICANN CEO was in Montevideo, and he wanted to see Dilma, to speak with her and say, look, maybe there is an alternative there. And of course, Dilma is not receiving anyone like this. And through family contacts, something like the assistant of Fadi is Brazilian, she knew someone working at the ministry, so he was able to get at least to the prime minister, the president's office, and he waited 3 days in front of the office, literally 3 days there to see Dilma and say, look, I may have a model. And at the end, Dilma, probably because she was tired of having someone knocking at the door, and said, okay, come in and tell me, what can you offer? And he made things, I mean, sometimes I'm amazed how we go into some thoughts of how things could be and why, but it was very simple. He said, Dilma, when was the last time that the UN solved something for you? And she took several minutes to answer. And still she was very upset and said, okay, but what do you have to offer? And Fadi was very smart and said he didn't have any idea. I mean, he didn't discuss that with no one. He said, look, why don't we do a multi-stakeholder conference where we figure out some common principles, where we all agree, because as you are upset because your phone was hacked, I'm upset because my phone was hacked, and also I'm upset because I see that the trust in the old system falls. And if the trust in the system falls, the whole internet is not going to be surviving for long. And that's how Net Mundiyal came to be. So it was a very top-down. But I challenge you in this moment in history, how do you gather a bottom-up process to change the turn of a process? You cannot. You just cannot. So if the incipit was top-down, and ICANN played that at the world stage level, I mean, I don't think, I mean, I used to work for the UN and before joining ICANN. And it's not really common practice that the CEO of an organization go and meets at head of state level like a diplomat. No? It's something that you wouldn't expect. But for the fact that he had an idea and the idea worked, he was able to bring it forward, then the conference was successful and was legitimate because of its own success. So no one is challenging the importance of Net Mundiyal because everybody found that was extremely successful, extremely valuable. At the point that even the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, when he heard about this thing, he sent someone from his office to Brazil and to follow Net Mundiyal because he smelled something that smells like OECD, something that has universal acceptance, but is outside the UN framework. So he kind of felt that something important was moving. Okay, let me finish here because I see that we are running over. But just to give some background to get our ideas together. And then from the global, supernatural, almost multi-stakeholder debate, let's look at how it can be effective at the national level. And the case of .rs, I mean, is fantastic. I mean, I wish that Italy or Spain had the similar model. They're awful. Their model is just their own control. They keep everything by themselves, and that's it. So what you do here is extremely important and helpful for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. I think you underlined also one important thing is that we touched upon the risks, a lot of risks when it comes to multi-stakeholder system. We didn't discuss a lot the benefits of that, but I assume that most of us here are already aware of the advantages of multi-stakeholder system and the needs. Wolf, a quick response and then we'll run for lunch. Otherwise.
Well, thanks, Vlada, and thanks, Andrea, for especially outlining or painting out a little bit the next playground, what was, of course, Net Mundiyal, what was besides the IGF another opportunity. What worked, in my opinion, fairly well, but the next step now, the Net Mundiyal initiative, in my opinion, is a crossroads. And I am very afraid of, at the very moment, that it will completely fail. And it may prove to become a disaster. The way it was handed over last summer from ICANN, and it was again just Fadi's idea, etc. Oh yes, there is a World Economic Forum in Switzerland, Davos. Tell me, the hell, how has the World Economic Forum ever since its inception, and living in Switzerland for more than 20 years, I was a very close observer. How does the WEF have ever proved to have any similarity with bottom-up, with non-elite, with anything what is constitutional for the multi-stakeholder model? And when I first heard the news from Fadi, it was in Sofia at the ICANN Studienkreis meeting, when he came, as he thought, with good news. We are now on a good way. All the participants of ICANN Studienkreis meeting were shocked. What? Are you serious about the WEF? So, and I think the next steps we have seen since then, they wanted to create a council which is finally elected, what is again hand-selected more or less a number of people who have applied for the job. And the launch of the initiative was postponed twice by now. So I think we have proof that the model can work. IGF, Juridik, other examples. But I think if the Net Mundiyal initiative will fail, a lot of people will point to the failure and forget about the few successes. And then the NMI, thanks to WEF, may be the turning point for the multi-stakeholder model. That's what I fear at the moment, and I'm rather skeptical. Thanks.
Thanks, Wolf. I guess this gives us a lot of space for continuation of discussion, which is not going to happen today, of course. The Eurodic is 2nd to, or 4th to 5th June, right?
4th and 5th.
4th to 5th June in Sofia. So don't waste. I mean, don't make sure that you use the opportunity to go there and continue these discussions. Is there any technical issues, or we just move to the lounge? Somewhere out there in the restaurant, or just in front of the housekeeping things, just outside of the room? Restaurant, perfect. Thanks a lot for joining, and see you around. Thanks.